A volatile northern front and reports that Hezbollah is weighing its response after Israel's strike that killed the group's top military commander. More from ILTV's Devo Klein.
Security officials say that Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem is at a strategic crossroads, under pressure to retaliate, but without the capability to launch a significant response. Still, sources close to Hezbollah warn the next conflict with Israel is, quote, only a matter of time. And massive crowds gathered in Beirut to mourn Ali Tabtabai, Hezbollah's military chief, killed in Sunday's airstrike on the outskirts of the capital, Beirut. The attack collapsed a multi-story building, killing 5 and wounding 28. Hezbollah praised Tabtabai as a great jihadist commander, while Lebanon's president urged international intervention to halt Israeli actions. The strike comes just days before Pope Leo's arrival in Lebanon, a visit many hoped would signal stability. Israel continues targeting Hezbollah arms depots and its rebuilding efforts under the fractured ceasefire. Tonight, a senior Hezbollah chief at the funeral warned the Zionists should be worried. Israel has reportedly told the Lebanese government it will press ahead with operations to weaken Hezbollah and expects cooperation on removing the group from south of the Litani and beyond. Despite high alert status, no new instructions have been issued to residents of northern Israel.
We are holding the hope that one day the Lebanese people will get along with their problems and we can be friends again. So, yeah, we are here to hold the borders and also to hold the hope.
Well, the White House on Monday ordered the start of a process to designate certain chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood as foreign terrorist organizations, marking a major shift in U.S. policy towards the transnational Islamist movement. Here's more on the latest developments. U.S. President Trump signed an executive order directing the Secretaries of State and Treasury to submit a report within 45 days on whether to designate specific chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization. The administration says the Brotherhood is not a social movement, but a transnational network that has spent decades financing and enabling terror groups across the Middle East. The fact sheet identifies possible targets in Egypt, Lebanon, and Jordan, while notably excluding chapters in Qatar, Turkey, and Syria, which have long provided political and financial cover for Brotherhood operations. The Muslim Brotherhood operates a global command structure known as the International Organization of the Brotherhood, which functions as a strategic hub coordinating branches across Middle East, Europe, and North America. This body guides the movement's political operations, its financial networks, its global propaganda, and its support to violent offshoots, including Hamas and Egyptian Islamic Jihad. Under federal law, a terror designation means anyone providing material support to the group can face criminal penalties and sweeping financial and travel sanctions. That includes individuals, charities, and any foreign national linked to the organization. The Muslim Brotherhood, founded in Egypt in 1928, is the ideological source code for modern Islamist terror. Its doctrine has directly inspired Hamas, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and the early founders of Al-Qaeda. U.S. officials say Brotherhood networks continue to recruit, radicalize, and fund operations that directly target Western allies and American interests. Supporters of the designation call it a long overdue step that finally acknowledges the Brotherhood as the central hub of global jihadist movements. By triggering the FTO process, the U.S. can freeze assets, shut down funding channels, block travel, and prosecute anyone providing support to the organization. The order states that this move comes as the Brotherhood branches, including Hamas, have escalated violence across the region and pose a direct threat to regional stability. The designation process is not yet final, but once certified, it would mark one of the most significant U.S. counterterrorism actions in years. Well, joining us now to explain a bit more about the Muslim Brotherhood and how they operate is Khalid Hassan, a national security and foreign policy researcher. Khalid, great to have you with us today. Can you explain, just for context, a bit about how the Muslim Brotherhood operates in the Middle East and why it's so dangerous?
Hi, Emily. Thanks for having me. I think the main reason the Muslim Brotherhood is very dangerous is because it mostly relies on essentially non-official funding. So it has funding from the zakah, which is the charity that's given by Muslims, and they use this to fund their activities. And because they don't really have, like an official sort of written hierarchy or membership, it's very, very difficult to actually prove who is a member, what they're doing, where they're getting funding from. which is why it's, I think, President Trump's executive order is going to be really quite, I think, restricted and limited in its impact on actually countering the Muslim Brotherhood.
Now, what is your take on the fact that we see Trump specifically singling out, for example, Egypt and Lebanon were mentioned, their chapters, yet Turkey, Syria and Qatar were all absent when they, of course, do have very problematic ties with the Muslim Brotherhood organization. Is there a method to this for the White House?
I'll be very honest. I think it's extremely inefficient. I think it's political theater. This is not actually serious, because if you look at Egypt, essentially they have been hunted down, they have been dismantled since President Sisi took over in 2013 and 2014. If you look at Jordan, they're dismantled and banned. They don't have public offices. If you look at Lebanon, they're largely irrelevant because you have Hezbollah, which essentially dominates. I think, to be very, very honest, and as an independent researcher, I actually get to say this openly and publicly, I think President Trump is trying to look tough on terrorism without actually upsetting his allies in Doha and in Ankara, because he just doesn't want to. He sees Turkey and Qatar as, allies, very significant and key allies, and he doesn't want to do anything that seems to be like interfering with their domestic politics or something that could get on their toes, basically.
Well, we've seen the Muslim Brotherhood damage the Middle East, of course, and many Arab states have flatly outlawed this organization. As you mentioned, Egypt had a big crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood that's ongoing. What threat would you say that the Muslim Brotherhood itself poses to the West?
Well, this is actually the main reason I find President Trump's executive order to be really challenging, because, they have a plan, and that plan is mainstreaming Islamism. Everyone who's done this, and, there are people who have been fighting the Muslim Brotherhood in the West long before I was even born, and they've been fighting them on campus, they've been fighting them in, academia, media, business, and they built this empire across the West that is extremely efficient, extremely well organized, which is why I'm really disappointed. I'm not going to hide my disappointment. This does not even address Canada. It doesn't even address the US. It doesn't address the UK. And again, I want to remind your audience that we now have the largest concentration of the Muslim Brotherhood in the UK and in Turkey. So that doesn't really affect them at all. This executive order is, in my view, really also legitimizes the Muslim Brotherhood's argument when they say, we are not all violent. It's only, a rogue minority of the group that is violent, which is what this executive order does. It basically suggests that this narrative, the Muslim Brotherhood narrative, is correct, and the group generally is not violent. It's just, a legitimate political movement.
Now, as an independent researcher, I want to ask you, what do you think would be a better method, both for the United States, for the United Kingdom, Canada, a lot of these Western democratic countries? What should they be doing when it comes to designating the Muslim Brotherhood and all of its affiliated organizations?
I think it's very clear. We have two examples. We have the UAE, we have Egypt, we have Saudi Arabia. I would most certainly advise that, the role model on how to counter the Muslim Brotherhood is actually the UAE, because the UAE is the most serious, and Saudi Arabia definitely. I'd argue that, there are some sort of, gaps in the Egyptian model. But do as the UAE is doing, and we also see, another example from, targeting specific chapters or segments of the Brotherhood. We see this in Israel. It's not very successful. I would argue, actually, it's almost, really very limited. So you can see the examples. One example is Israel, which targets, the few chapters or few segments, not efficient. Or you have the UAE model, which is the most efficient and the most actually strategic and very concentrated and focused. That's what you should do. Go to the Emiratis and say, how can we do this? And do as they say. That's my opinion.
All right, well, let's hope the White House hears your advice. Thank you so much for joining us today, Khalid Hassan.
Thank you.
Well, as we move forward here at ILTV, we're not just delivering the news, we're carrying out a mission. Every day we work to strengthen Israel's global voice and stand firm for Zionism with factual pro-Israel reporting. By subscribing to our app, you're joining us as a partner in this mission, and you'll get access to our new 24/7 channel with live broadcasts at the top of every hour. Scan the QR code on your screen to subscribe now. A new development in the search for the remaining hostages in Gaza. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad claims it has recovered the body of one hostage in central Gaza and announced the transfer of the remains to the Red Cross this afternoon at 4 p.m., after which Israel will conduct forensic testing for identification. The news comes as Hamas and Islamic Jihad continue search efforts for the last remaining bodies still missing. Here's more from our correspondent, India Naftali.
The Palestinian Islamic Jihad said Monday that it recovered the body of a hostage in an area north of the Nusayrat refugee camp in central Gaza. The group claims the body was found during excavation work earlier in the day. But hours after the announcement, there was still no indication from the Islamic Jihad or Hamas on when the body would be transferred to Israel. The news comes as both groups continue search operations for the final 3 hostages whose bodies still remain inside the strip. 2 Israelis, Dror Or and Master Sergeant Ran Gvili, and 1 Thai national, Suthi Sakrin Talak. All 3 were killed on October 7th and abducted into Gaza. Arabic language media reported that the digging operations have intensified since Friday. Footage from central Gaza showed Islamic Jihad gunmen standing next to excavators, some bearing Egyptian flags as the group claims to be searching for burial sites. Under the terms of the ceasefire agreement, Hamas and Islamic Jihad are required to return the bodies of all deceased hostages. But both groups up until now said they have been unable to locate the remaining 3, despite what they called repeated efforts. Israel questions these claims. For Israeli families still waiting, there is no clear timeline for when they will finally be able to bring home their loved ones for burial.
The IDF is vowing to track down and eliminate every last Hamas fighter still hiding underground on the Israeli side of the Yellow Line. Troops are destroying tunnels, striking targets, and flushing terrorists out of their last hiding spots. More from ILTV's Devil Klein.
For weeks, combat teams from the Nachal and Golani brigades under the Gaza division have been operating deep inside Rafah, destroying tunnels, striking targets, and flushing terrorists out of their last hiding spots. IDF engineers, together with Yahalom, have encircled multiple underground routes, collapsing hundreds of meters of tunnels and crushing the infrastructure above ground. In just the past week, more than 60 targets were hit, including 15 shafts and 40 buildings used by Hamas. Inside these areas, troops found rifles, explosives, magazines, and stockpiles of weaponry, proof of a terror network still operating beneath Rafah. Commanders say dozens of Hamas operatives remain trapped since the collapse of the previous truce, led by a battalion commander and company commanders. They are running out of food, running out of air, and running out of time. Some emerge from the tunnels desperate for supplies and are immediately targeted.
אנחנו נלחמים פה בצוות קרב משולב, גם רקם, גם חי"ר וכוחות איסוף ואוויר. כשהמטרה המרכזית היא איתור האויב והשמדתו או כניעה שלו. אלה 2 המשימות המרכזיות שיש לנו במרחב. במהלך השבועות האחרונים היה לנו התקלות עם 4 מחבלים. ומה שקרה אתמול, 17 מחבלים יוצאים במרחב גזרת הצקח של הנחל, ויחד עם כוחות של גדוד 12 מושמדים וחלקם נשבים. אנחנו ממשיכים במשימות עד שנעצור אותם עד הניצחון.
Just last week, troops eliminated 4 operatives who broke above ground. Over the weekend, 17 more terrorists crawled out of 2 tunnel routes. 11 were killed in intense fire exchanges, and 6 were captured for interrogation. Today, the IDF says 2 more terror operatives were killed after crossing the Yellow Line in northern Gaza, approaching troops of the 188th Armored Brigade and reservists of the Carmeli Brigade, posing an immediate threat. Earlier, the Israeli Air Force struck 3 operatives in southern Gaza who had attempted to approach troops. The IDF remains deployed across Gaza to remove any immediate threat under the current ceasefire agreement.
Well, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, confirms it has ended operations in the Gaza Strip after a troubled 5-month tenure distributing aid. More from ILTV's Devil Klein.
GHF Executive Director John Acri says the organization's goal from the beginning was to meet an urgent need, prove that a new approach could succeed where others failed, and hand off that success to the broader international community. Acri notes that the creation of the Civil Military Coordination Center, or CMCC, and reinvigorated international engagement means that moment has arrived. GHF, an American organization, was established with close involvement from Israeli officials and business leaders connected to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Israel says the goal was to ensure aid reached civilians while excluding Hamas, which it accuses of co-opting humanitarian relief. Netanyahu said the plan was for the GHF to eventually become the primary provider of aid in Gaza, replacing UN and international agencies allegedly exploited by Hamas. Despite these challenges, GHF says it distributed more than 187 million meals to Gazans, who number around 2 million. However, by September, it was distributing only a small fraction of the aid entering Gaza, and promises to scale up operations from 3 to 16 sites never materialized. GHF now hands over its model to the CMCC, hoping the international community will carry forward aid distribution while keeping it out of Hamas's control.
Well, joining us now to discuss the latest developments in Gaza and beyond is senior fellow at the International Institute for Counterterrorism, Colonel Miri Eisen. Colonel Eisen, thank you for joining us today. Always a pleasure to have you on. Well, the ceasefire in Gaza is holding, sort of, but the IDF is also actively hunting down the Hamas terrorists hiding in Gaza in the areas they still control. What is the Army's general strategy here, and does it threaten the future of the ceasefire agreement?
Emily, I think that we all get the term ceasefire incorrectly. Ceasefire is not the end of the war. Ceasefire is certainly not peace. This is what ceasefire looks like. And I say that because what Hamas terror operatives are trying to do is to act as if it's peace, to try peace as if it's not war anymore, and to come out and to challenge the agreement that they agreed upon when Israel realigned on that yellow line. They're coming out of the tunnels. They're trying to expand their areas, and the IDF is not having any of that. As I said, it's a ceasefire. The conditions of the ceasefire were that all of the hostages would come back. And as you mentioned before, 3 of the hostages dead, but 3 hostages have not yet been brought back to Israel. And every single day, the Hamas terror operatives continue to challenge the deployment that was agreed upon. So I don't see this as changing the situation. What I want to hope is that the last of the hostages come back, and at that stage, you can already talk about that second stage, which would be an additional Israeli redeployment and the possible entrance of some kind of other force, not the IDF, to go into the areas of the Gaza Strip to try to take control, to try to turn it into a place that is run by something other than Hamas.
Well, you brought up something interesting. I mean, what do you expect to see from the international force that's supposed to be being assembled right now to keep Gaza out of Hamas's hands? I mean, the million-dollar question still remains, who is going to disarm Hamas?
Nobody's going to disarm Hamas, and I say that very sadly. I think that what we can expect is for it to be demobilized, and I don't want to just play around with words. That means that Hamas won't control. They won't be the ones distributing the food. They won't be the ones that are running water, education, trying in its own way, even if it's by itty-bitty steps, to rebuild some of the Gaza Strip for the 2 million people who live there. That doesn't turn those 2 million people into exactly supporters of Israel, and that's me being sarcastic, but I say that because the international, somebody has to come in to run the day-to-day life, and it cannot be Hamas. But you asked about disarming. I do not think this international force will disarm, and that is one of the gaps. The devil in the details. When it comes to that stage 2, when you read carefully, it says first demobilize. The disarming is not as strong in the wording. I don't know what I hope for, but I would like a better future for people in the Gaza Strip, and I can't have it include Hamas ruling. And let's take it stage by stage. I do think that somebody else has to come in there, so it isn't Hamas rebuilding itself now as the one ruling in the Gaza Strip.
Now, if Israel is indeed forced to act, whether to disarm or demobilize in some sense Hamas from maintaining control, how is that going to be received internationally? Will Israel ultimately be forced to choose between defending itself and maintaining even U.S. support?
So that's the devil in the details about any kind of international force being inside the Gaza Strip, because immediately that does limitations. And all we have to do is look at southern Lebanon, 1979 until and including 2025, where we have a United Nations force that was boosted after the Second Lebanon War, and all it does is hinder, not the Israeli activity against Lebanon, the Israeli activity against Hezbollah. And so you're absolutely right, that is one of the biggest challenges. Having said that, I state clearly, Emily, I don't want us, Israel, to be the one in the Gaza Strip. It needs to be run. There are 2 million people in there, and it isn't something that you can do easily. And when we're looking for a happily ever after, where everything is wonderful, I think that letting the international force in there, and yes, that will hinder Israel, and they may not disarm Hamas, but you have to have somebody else running the Gaza Strip instead of Hamas.
Well, when it comes to the next stages of the ceasefire, I do want to ask, why is so much responsibility being placed on Israel when Hamas was very explicitly ordered to return the hostages and hostage bodies within 72 hours? That was done by President Trump himself. The living hostages are home, thank God, but Hamas has continued to play games and delay, even in cases where they knew where some of these bodies were. As of now, 3 hostage bodies do remain in Hamas' hands. But where is the pressure on Hamas from the international community?
There is no pressure on Hamas and the international community. And I would say in its own way that if I want to pinpoint the one success that I abhor of Hamas in this 2-year war is that they've managed to legitimize themselves. And you know what, Emily? I blame very much the international community that allowed that, but that is Hamas's success and to a certain degree also Israel's failure, because there is no separation between Hamas and the Palestinians. So right now it's seen as you can't pressure the poor Palestinians, and you know what? They are the poor Palestinians. But you absolutely can pressure Hamas, but nobody does that separation anymore. Legitimizing Hamas by doing so in so many different ways has really put this into a place where right now that's going to be our biggest challenge in the day after, to delegitimize completely a terror army that is in the Gaza Strip, just like Hezbollah is a terror army, and there are other ones. Nobody in the world wants to legitimize a terror army.
All right, thank you so much, Colonel Miri Eisen, for those insights today.
Thank you.
Well, the Bank of Israel has cut interest rates for the first time in nearly 2 years, lowering the key lending rate by a quarter point to 4.25%. The move comes as inflation continues to moderate and the economy shows signs of recovery following last month's ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza. The central bank cites a stabilized inflation environment and stronger economic activity as reasons for the decision. The last rate cut was in January 2024 when the bank sought to support households and businesses hit hard by the war triggered by the October 7, 2023 Hamas onslaught. Governor Amir Yaron says geopolitical risks and supply constraints still pose threats, but the cut will provide relief to mortgage holders and loan borrowing households across Israel. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich had pressured the bank to act, warning of tax measures if borrowing costs remained high. Well, overnight, we did see heavy rain, including flooding in several areas of Israel, with some streets still blocked off. But now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Cloudy skies are expected around most of the country tonight, with temperatures reaching lows of 17 degrees Celsius or 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we'll see cloudy skies and partly rainy showers alongside steady temperatures, seeing highs of 25 degrees Celsius or 78 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels and our new live channel. You can also catch us on Screen IL with 24/7 live coverage. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Emily Schrader. Be well, and thank you for watching.